I knew the moment he called my name across the open floor that something vile was coming. Martin never said my name unless he needed a target or an audience, and I'd spent 2 years learning exactly which of the two I was supposed to be. Still, I turned. I always turned. That's the curse of being professional. You respond even when every cell in your body begs you to run. Emily, he drawled, leaning against the edge of my desk as if it were his personal stage. You should wear something more revealing. You're clearly hiding your potential. There it was, the daily dose of poison. For a moment, the office air thickened, sticky and suffocating like I'd stepped into steam. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A few keys clattered, a mouse scrolled, someone coughed. All those tiny office noises that meant, we heard him, we know exactly what he said, and we'll pretend we didn't because pretending is safer. My lips stretched into a tight smile I didn't feel. I'll keep that in mind, I said, the words brittle, like cheap glass. Inside, though? Inside, I burned. Rage surged so hot I could feel it pulsing beneath my skin, a warning flare with nowhere to go. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, to choke on his own smirk, to shove his compliment somewhere anatomically improbable. But I didn't. Not yet. Not today. Not while I still had bills to pay and a career to protect. He tapped my folder with 2 fingers, slow, patronizing. Good. A woman in finance should use every asset she has. He winked. Winking at 48 years old in a room full of professionals. The kind of wink that made your stomach twist, not from flattery, but from the sickening knowledge that he believed he had the right. Then he walked away, leaving the scent of his cologne hanging in the air like an insult. My hands hovered over my keyboard long after he left. The spreadsheet lines blurred. My throat tightened. I felt dirty, not because of anything I'd done, but because of everything he made me feel. Cornered, reduced, trapped in a body someone else thought he owned. Around me, the office settled back into its usual rhythm. Phones rang, printers whirred, conversations resumed. A couple of my co-workers exchanged a glance, subtle, uncomfortable, definitely not surprised. But they didn't say a word. They never did. Everyone knew what Martin was. The company tolerated him because he made money. The employees tolerated him because they needed money. And women like me, junior enough to be vulnerable, senior enough to be visible, got the worst of it. His comments, his lingering stares, the way he positioned himself too close during meetings, like he was trying to push the boundaries of decency just to see how far they would stretch. And every day, I let him, or felt like I did. I clicked open the quarterly report, trying to lose myself in columns of numbers, trying to forget the crawling sensation his words left behind. Since when had the finance department turned into this? Since when was competence not enough? Since when did just doing my job require surviving a man whose ego filled the entire building? "Hey," whispered Claire from the desk beside mine, leaning over without looking up from her monitor. "You okay?" "Fine," I murmured. A lie so small and so common it barely felt like lying at all. She hesitated, then typed faster, like she was trying to express sympathy through keystrokes. But sympathy wasn't enough. Not anymore. As I worked through invoices, a dull ache settled between my ribs. Not sadness, not fear. Something older, harder. A kind of fatigue that settles in the bones. I was tired. Tired of smiling. Tired of pretending. Tired of being polite to someone who saw my politeness as permission. I was tired of swallowing anger like medicine and hoping it wouldn't poison me. When I got up to grab a coffee, I caught a reflection of myself in the glass door, my blouse buttoned to the collar, my hair pulled back, my posture rigid. I looked like someone holding herself together with staples and paper clips. Someone trying to be invisible in a world that wouldn't stop staring. I leaned closer to the glass, studying my own eyes. There was something there I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not exhaustion. A spark. A refusal waiting for oxygen. I didn't know yet what it meant. I didn't know what it would demand from me or what it would cost. But I knew this. The next time Martin crossed a line, and he would, I would not be the woman who forced a polite smile. Something inside me had shifted, something irreversible. Maybe he thought he could keep pushing. Maybe everyone did. But today, as I sat back at my desk and opened another file, something crystallized with perfect clarity. I'm done letting him decide who I am. And although I didn't yet see the road ahead, its shadows, its dangers, its consequences, I did feel the first quiet pulse of a truth that would soon change everything. A man like him only stops when someone pushes back. And I was getting ready to push. By the next morning, the tension I'd felt in my chest had settled into something sharper, like a needle hidden in fabric. I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on the monthly reconciliations, pretending that yesterday's compliment wasn't still echoing inside my skull. But I wasn't the same. Something had cracked open. Something that refused to be taped shut again. It happened again sooner than I expected. Martin strolled in late, as always, carrying a to-go latte someone else had probably fetched. His suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to signal he believed himself irresistible. He scanned the room like a king assessing his subjects. His eyes found me instantly. They always did. "Morning, everyone," he announced. "Hope you're all ready for a productive day." His tone suggested he personally invented productivity. People murmured polite greetings. Chairs shifted. A printer beeped. Nothing unusual until he walked toward me, stopping just close enough that I could smell the bitterness of his coffee. "Emily," he said softly, "don't tell me you're hiding behind those spreadsheets again. You know, with your assets, you should be client-facing. They'd be lining up to sign deals." A few heads twitched. Not full turns. No one dared, but slight, guilty movements. They heard. They always heard. My hands curled into fists under the desk. His words slithered through my stomach, turning it sour. The old me, the one from last week, last month, last year, would have swallowed the disgust and offered a polite laugh. But today, something refused to play along. "I'm fine where I am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Come on," he pushed, leaning his hip against my desk. "If you loosened up a bit, you'd go far. I mean that as a compliment." Compliment. The word made my skin crawl. Compliment was a flower. His version was mold growing on it. I looked past him deliberately, scanning the room. A tiny rebellion, maybe, but a rebellion nonetheless. My co-workers avoided my gaze. They always did when he hovered. Some looked apologetic, some indifferent, some simply afraid. I didn't blame them. Fear was a language we all spoke fluently here. Martin tapped my desk twice, the sound annoyingly rhythmic. "We'll talk later," he said, as if we had something mutually interesting to discuss. He walked off toward his glass-walled office, whistling. I exhaled slowly, teeth clenched. My pulse drummed behind my ears. The line he'd crossed yesterday had turned invisible again, ready for him to step over it a second time. But something inside me whispered, "Not today. Not again." I tried to work. I really tried. But my thoughts kept looping, circling the same truth. If I let this slide, he'd push harder. He always pushed harder. This wasn't some one-off comment. This was a pattern, a progression, a man testing limits he assumed didn't exist. Around noon, during a lull when half the office went for lunch and the other half scrolled on their phones, I stood up, grabbed my water bottle, and walked toward the break room. Claire caught my eye. "You sure you're okay?" she whispered again. "Not really," I admitted. It surprised both of us. She hesitated, then closed the distance between us. "Look, everyone sees how he talks to you, but you know how it is. HR protects him. They always protect the people with titles." I nodded. I knew. God, I knew. "If you need anything," she added weakly, "I'm here." It was the kind of support that meant well but accomplished nothing, like handing someone a napkin while their house burns down. But I appreciated it. At least someone acknowledged the smoke. I drank water slowly, staring at the stale motivational posters on the break room wall. Every one of them felt like an insult. Speak up. Be brave. Integrity is everything. If only the building practiced what it preached. When I returned to my desk, Martin was there again, waiting. Just standing, watching. My stomach tightened. "Emily," he said, lowering his voice, "you and I should schedule some one-on-one time to go over your future here." I froze. Future. In his tone, it wasn't a promise. It was a threat disguised as mentorship. He leaned in closer, too close, close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from him. "I can help you," he murmured, "if you're willing to help me." There it was, the line. Not implied anymore, not hinted, spoken, naked. A proposition wrapped in corporate etiquette. Something hot and electric surged through me. Not fear this time, but fury so pure it almost made my vision sharpen. I straightened. "No," I said quietly. His eyebrows lifted. He wasn't used to the word. "No," he repeated, as if the syllable offended him. "I'm not meeting with you alone," I said, "and I don't need your help." For a brief, glorious second, surprise flickered across his features, then irritation, then calculation. "Well," he said, stepping back, "let's hope your performance review reflects that confidence." He walked away slowly, letting the threat linger behind him like a dark trail. I sat down, heart hammering, but the fear didn't consume me this time, because beneath it was certainty, clarity. If I didn't act soon, he would escalate. If I let him define my boundaries, he'd crush them. If I stayed silent, I'd become exactly what he wanted, compliant, scared, breakable. Not anymore. Not ever again. I glanced at his office, at the glass walls, at the stacks of reports and contracts I worked with every day. That was when the thought formed, quiet, precise, razor sharp. I won't fight him in a corporate way. He played dirty. So would I. And for the first time in months, maybe years, the air around me shifted, charged, electric, alive with the possibility of choosing myself over fear. He'd crossed the line. Now I would too. It started with a single misplaced decimal. Or rather, that's what I thought it was. Something tiny, something boring, something that should have been nothing more than another correction in a day full of them. I'd been combing through vendor payments for hours, trying to distract myself from the residue of Martin's latest threat, when the inconsistency appeared like a blinking light in fog. A payment of $14,985. Then another, $14,985. Then a third. Same vendor, same amount, same date range. We never paid identical amounts like that. Not in this department. Not for this contractor. I sat back, tapping my pen against my teeth. The office hummed around me, the usual clatter of keys, the muted chatter from the far corner, the faint buzz of old fluorescent lights. Everything utterly ordinary, except for the numbers glowing on my screen like they were trying to confess something. I clicked into the vendor profile. Arlington Solutions. I'd never heard of them, and I'd worked here long enough to know almost every recurring name, even the obscure ones. The listed service, operational consulting. A vague term, deliberately vague. But vague didn't scare me. Numbers that didn't make sense did. I opened the attached contract. The signature at the bottom looked wrong. Too light, too smooth, like someone had dragged a stylus across glass instead of signing with a pen. And the file metadata said it had been modified a month after it was supposedly finalized. My pulse quickened. I opened another file. Same signatures, same inconsistencies. Then another, and another. Within minutes, I found the same pattern repeated across multiple quarters, payments routed through Arlington Solutions, totaling nearly $300,000. All approved by one person. Martin. I felt a slow, creeping chill slide down my spine. I knew my boss was a creep. I knew he was unprofessional, manipulative, arrogant, predatory, but corrupt. I leaned closer to my monitor, scrolling through the timeline of approvals. His digital signature appeared like a stain across every suspicious transaction. His name tied to reports full of numbers too perfectly rounded, too evenly spaced, too clean to be real. Dirty money disguised as clean formatting. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. The office noise faded behind me, swallowed by the pounding of my heart. Because this wasn't workplace harassment. This wasn't an inappropriate comment or a sleazy invitation. This was criminal. This was fireable, indictable, career-ending, and I'd stumbled onto it by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Maybe the universe decided it was time I stopped playing defense. I printed a few summary pages just to ground myself in something physical. The printer whirred softly, each sheet sliding out with quiet urgency. I grabbed the warm pages and scanned them again, looking for any innocent explanation. There wasn't one. The amounts were too consistent, the vendor too obscure, the contract too sloppy, the approval chain too convenient. This was a slush channel, plain and simple. Money quietly siphoned off, hidden in plain sight. And he thought no one would notice because no one ever looked too closely. Because everyone assumed he was competent. Because people like him were always protected by the illusion that they were too important to be questioned. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something darker, something sharper, something like opportunity. Because suddenly, I wasn't just a woman dealing with harassment. I wasn't a subordinate shoved against boundaries she didn't agree to. I wasn't a quiet employee trying to stay unnoticed. I was holding threads to something he couldn't afford anyone to pull. I lowered the papers and exhaled slowly. "This is my chance," I whispered to the empty space around me. But right behind the thrill came a wave of dread. This was dangerous. If I confronted him without proof, he'd bury me. If I went to HR, they'd warn him. If I hesitated, he'd cover his tracks. If I said the wrong thing to the wrong person, I'd end up unemployed. Or worse, he'd find a way to make me look complicit. I pushed the papers back under a stack of mundane reports, acting casual when Claire walked by. "You coming to lunch?" she asked. "Not hungry," I said too quickly. She gave me a curious look but let it go. I waited until she was out of sight before sliding the suspicious printouts into my notebook. I reopened the spreadsheets and pretended to work, but my mind was nowhere near the screen. It was racing, weaving possibilities, calculating risks. I needed evidence, Real evidence, and I needed it without tipping him off. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 p.m. 5 more hours until the office emptied out enough for me to search freely. My knee bounced under the desk, adrenaline itching beneath my skin. $300,000. 300,000 reasons he could never find out I knew. My eyes drifted toward his office. His silhouette moved behind the glass, hands gesturing as he talked on the phone. Confident, smug, completely unaware that his world had just grown fragile. I swallowed hard. I didn't plan to become involved in something like this. I didn't want to. But the universe rarely cared about what we wanted. It cared about timing, and timing, apparently, was on my side for once. I straightened in my chair, my decision crystallizing like ice. If he wanted to push boundaries, fine. I'd push back with numbers, with documents, with truth. And if I played this right, he wouldn't just lose his power over me, he'd lose everything. By the time the clock hit 7:18 p.m., the office looked like a carcass picked clean. Desks deserted, swivel chairs abandoned mid-rotation, lights dimmed to that eerie after-hours glow that made every shadow look like it carried a secret. Most people had fled at 5 sharp. A few lingered until 6. By 7, even the cleaning crew had done their rounds and vanished. But I stayed. Not because I liked working late. No one liked being alone here at night. But because tonight wasn't about work. Tonight was about evidence. Real evidence. I'd spent the last few hours pretending to revise cost projections, my face expressionless, my heartbeat a drum roll beneath the silence. Every time I glanced toward Martin's office, fear twisted in my stomach. But the blinds were drawn and his coat was gone. He'd left 20 minutes earlier, barking into his phone about a client dinner, which was probably code for schmoozing or something sleazier. As soon as I was sure he was gone for good, I stood up, smoothed my blouse, and walked toward the records room at the back of the floor. Each step felt too loud. My shoes clicked against the linoleum like hammer strikes. The building groaned faintly, the kind of old building noises you never notice when people are around. The air felt colder. The lights buzzed inconsistently, one flickering near the exit like it was winking at me, urging me to reconsider this very stupid, very bold plan. But I wasn't backing down. Inside the records room, rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls like silent soldiers. The smell of dust and paper hung thick in the air. I shut the door carefully behind me, my fingers trembling, not from fear, not exactly, but from the knowledge that what I was about to do would change everything. I found his cabinet quickly, Executive Oversight, M. Turner. Of course he had an entire cabinet dedicated to himself. Of course, the key was sloppily hidden under a stack of outdated budget binders. Arrogance made people lazy. Corruption made them predictable. The key clicked into the lock with a sound that felt like a promise. I pulled open the drawer and froze. There they were: contracts, payment approvals, vendor correspondence, quarterly summaries, all neatly arranged, color-coded, labeled with almost obsessive care. Except the obsession wasn't about accuracy, it was about control, about covering tracks so thoroughly he believed no one would dare look twice. Well, I dared. My breath deepened as I grabbed the first folder. My hands shook lightly, part adrenaline, part fury, part the heavy realization that I was no longer an employee doing her job. I was a threat. I carried the documents to the old copier near the back wall. The machine looked outdated, the kind you had to coax into cooperation. Under normal circumstances, I hated it. Tonight, it was my lifeline. I fed the first page into the scanner. Click. The sound struck me like a gunshot. I froze, eyes darting toward the door. Nothing. No footsteps, no keys jingling, just silence. I exhaled and hit the next scan. Click, click, click. Each noise pulsed through my chest like a second heartbeat. My palms were damp, my shoulders stiff. Every minute I expected the door to creak open and his voice to drip into the room, smug and poisonous. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" But the door stayed closed. I worked faster, moving page after page beneath the scanner, contracts showing unexplained payments, approval forms with his signature, bank transfer confirmations routed through Arlington Solutions, email printouts where he fast-tracked payments without explanation, patterns upon patterns, evidence piling up like stones. At one point, I paused to steady myself. I felt the tremor in my hands, the heaviness of what I was holding. I'd never done something like this, never crossed such a boundary, never entered the territory of exposing a man who held my career in his fist. But he crossed boundaries every day. He pushed me to this. A rustling noise outside the door made my heart vault into my throat. My fingers hovered above the scanner button. I held my breath so long my lungs burned, but the sound faded. Probably the building shifting, or maybe my imagination was turning shadows into monsters. It didn't matter. I resumed scanning, faster now, more determined. My stack of copies grew, evidence grew, my courage grew. By the time I scanned the last page, the clock read 8:42 p.m. My back ached. My throat felt dry. My nerves were a tangled mess. But I had what I came for. I tucked the copies into a thin black folder I brought from home, slid the originals back exactly where I found them, and wiped the table lightly with my sleeve, just in case. Before leaving the room, I took one last look at the drawer labeled M. Turner. The metal gleamed under the dim light, quiet and unassuming, hiding $300,000 in fraud behind a locked panel and the arrogance of a man who believed no one would ever question him. I whispered into the still air, "You should have been more careful." Then I shut the drawer. I stepped out into the empty hallway. My steps felt steadier now, purposeful. The office, once a place of fear, seemed smaller, less threatening. In my bag, the black folder felt heavy, dangerous, but empowering. I walked toward the elevator with a strange sense of clarity. The doors slid open, reflecting my tired face, my tense shoulders, and my eyes, sharp, alert, burning with resolve. Tonight, I hadn't just gathered evidence. Tonight, I'd crossed a line of my own, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I walked into the office feeling like a completely different person, like someone wearing a secret under her clothes instead of skin. I'd barely slept, but adrenaline made up for the lack of rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the copies in my bag, the numbers glowing like warning signs in the dark. I thought I'd feel victorious, empowered. But mostly, I felt alert, like a wire pulled too tight. Martin wasn't in yet. His office lights were off, his chair empty. Good. I needed a few minutes to breathe. I slid into my desk, powered up my computer, and tried to look like any other exhausted employee starting her day. 10 minutes later, the elevator dinged. He arrived. His shoes clicked aggressively along the carpet, announcing his presence before he even appeared. When he stepped into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted, subtle but noticeable. People spoke quieter. Chairs stopped moving. It was like prey sensing a predator. His gaze swept the office before landing on me. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He walked straight toward my desk. "Morning, Emily," he said, voice smooth, too smooth. "You look tired. Rough night?" My stomach tightened. He didn't know anything. He couldn't. But his tone made the comment feel like a threat anyway. "I'm fine," I said. "Good," he replied, leaning one hand on my desk. His fingers drummed lightly against the wood. "Because we need to discuss your attitude yesterday, when you refused a private meeting." He said, refused, like it was a personal insult. I locked my jaw. "I don't think the conversation was appropriate." His eyebrows rose. "Appropriate?" He laughed softly, like I'd told the cutest joke. "Emily, you're being dramatic. I was offering guidance, mentorship. Most people would be grateful." I felt heat surge up my throat. Not embarrassment, but fury. Most people don't get comments about their bodies from their boss. He didn't even flinch. "Oh, come on. Don't be stiff. I complimented you. You should try appreciating it." Compliment. He said it again like the word had no weight, no consequences. I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to not look toward his office where, in a locked drawer, the originals of his fraudulent contracts sat waiting to betray him. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that no one else could hear. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but you need to be careful. This attitude doesn't look good on you." There it was, the threat, barely disguised, lightly wrapped in corporate niceties. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I felt it echo in my skull. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I would crumble. He thought all the lines he crossed meant nothing because no one would ever hold him accountable. He had no idea. I shifted back in my chair, enough to show I wasn't intimidated. "I'm doing my job," I said calmly. "Maybe you should do yours." His smirk froze. Just a fraction. Just long enough to confirm he wasn't used to pushback. Then the expression twisted, hardening at the edges. "Watch yourself," he murmured. "You're replaceable." I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear tightening my chest. I felt clarity. I knew something he didn't know, something that made him very human, very flawed, very breakable. He straightened, smoothing the front of his suit. "I want to see you in my office in 10 minutes, he said sharply. "We'll sort out whatever little attitude problem you've developed." He walked away without waiting for a response. I sat frozen for a moment, my hands gripping the edges of my chair. When I finally exhaled, it shook like it hadn't been meant to leave my body. Across from me, Claire watched nervously. "What did he say?" "Nothing important," I lied. Because it wasn't important, not compared to what was waiting for him. 10 minutes passed slowly, painfully. Every second felt like a countdown. When the time was up, I stood, smoothing my skirt with trembling fingers. My legs felt strangely steady, not relaxed, but purposeful, like they knew exactly where they were taking me. I walked toward his office. He was already inside, leaning back in his chair, the picture of confidence. His jacket hung behind him, his tie loosened just enough to say he felt in control. He shut the door behind me. "Sit," he said. I didn't. I stood. He frowned. I said sit. "I prefer to stand." His jaw flexed, a small irritated twitch. "You're really testing my patience today." "Maybe it needs to be tested," I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken conflict. He smoothed his expression into something false and paternal. "Emily," he began, "I've always tried to support you, to make you feel welcome, but lately you've been cold, defensive. I'm concerned about your performance and your behavior." I stared at him, and something inside me simply snapped. The tension, the fear, the disgust. All of it broke at once. I stepped closer, planting my hands on the edge of his desk. "You want to talk about behavior?" I asked quietly. Fine. I'm done being polite about yours. His eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a warning. You're walking a dangerous line. I met his stare without blinking. No, I whispered. You are. And in that moment, before the folder, before the confrontation, before everything that would follow, I realized something with startling clarity. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He couldn't touch me. Not now. Not with what I had. And that realization, solid, unshakable, was the final straw. The moment I closed the door behind me, the air in Martin's office felt different, thicker, charged, like static waiting for a spark. He sat behind his desk with forced calm, fingers steepled, eyes gleaming with irritation he was trying and failing to disguise. He thought he was ready for a confrontation. He had no idea what was coming. I carried the black folder in my hand, the one holding the copies I made 2 nights ago. The folder felt warm against my palm, almost alive, like a weapon. Emily, he said, leaning back, pretending he held the upper hand. Before you say anything else you'll regret, I suggest you think very carefully. You've been emotional lately, irrational even. Let's try to fix this before it becomes a real problem for you. For me. He always framed everything that way, as if he were doing me a favor by threatening me. I didn't sit down. Instead, I walked forward and placed the folder on the center of his desk, gently, deliberately, as if delivering a gift. He glanced at it, annoyed. What's this supposed to be? Your resignation? No, I said. It's something better. He smirked, waiting for me to explain. His arrogance was almost unbelievable. The man thought he was bulletproof. You know, I said, my voice calm despite the storm tightening in my chest. You keep telling me I should wear something more revealing. Show more of my potential. He leaned back, smiling like he'd just won. Finally, you're loosening up. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let the disgust reach my expression. I kept my voice steady. Well, I said, placing my hand lightly on the folder, I want you to take a look at my idea of potential. His smirk faltered. Just barely. With a slow hand, he opened the folder. He stared down at the first page, then the second. I watched his face as the realization crept in like a shadow spreading across a wall. His complexion shifted from smug pink to a dreadful gray. What? He whispered, flipping to another page. Where did you get these? I found them, I said. In the records room, in your drawer labeled Executive Oversight. Your signature's on every one of them. He swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed in a tight, jerky motion. These are confidential documents, he snapped, voice cracking on the last word. And you created them, I replied, or altered them, or approved them, whichever version of the story you'll try to sell. He shot up from his chair so fast the wheels screeched. You had no right to go through my files. You had no right to steal from the company, I countered, and you had no right to harass me. For a moment he froze, paralyzed between fury and fear. His mouth opened slightly, as if he were trying to find the right angle, the right excuse, the right tactic to regain control. He settled on intimidation. You don't understand what you're doing, he hissed. This is dangerous. For both of us. No, I said quietly. Just for you. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Not as someone he could mold or corner or belittle, but as something unpredictably sharp. Something capable of cutting. Emily, he started, reaching for the folder. We can work something out. I stepped back, out of reach. Don't touch it. His hand froze midair, trembling. This was the moment, the shift, the power reversal neither of us could unlive. "You listen to me," he said, trying to recover authority. "I can ruin your career. I can make sure you never work in finance again. You think anyone will hire you after—" "I have copies," I interrupted. The words hit him like a slap. His mouth snapped shut. I continued, "Everything in that folder?" I scanned it. "All of it. Multiple copies, actually." He looked like a man who'd been dropped into cold water. You wouldn't dare." "You dared," I said. "For years." Silence sat between us, heavy and suffocating. I took a breath and laid out the truth like cards on a table. "You harassed me. You threatened my position. You approved $300,000 in fraudulent payments. And you genuinely believed no one would ever hold you accountable." His fingers twitched. "Emily, let's be reasonable," he said, voice cracking, desperate beneath the forced calm. "You don't want to destroy your own workplace. Think about the consequences." "I have," I said, "more than you realize." I leaned closer, lowering my voice to something cold and precise. "I'm not going to HR. I'm not going to the police. Not yet. I'm giving you a choice instead." His eyes widened at the word choice, because he knew it was no longer his. "You stop harassing me," I said. "You approve my transfer out of this department, and you pay compensation." "Compensation?" he repeated, stunned. "This sounds like blackmail." "You can call it whatever you want. I call it finally having leverage." He stared at the folder, then at me. Panic flickered across his features again. Real, unrestrained panic. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I already have." The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. He sank slowly into his chair, hands trembling on the armrests. His eyes darted over the documents like they might rearrange themselves into innocence. They didn't. $300,000 didn't lie. I didn't lie. Not anymore. He looked up at me, broken confidence, fractured ego, terror creeping through every line of his face. "What do you want?" he whispered. I almost smiled, but I kept my expression steady and calm because this moment wasn't about vengeance. It was about power. And for the first time since I'd walked into this company, I had more of it than he did. For a long moment, Martin didn't speak. He just sat there, staring at the papers like they were shards of glass he'd accidentally grabbed with both hands. His face had gone pale, the color draining from him one slow heartbeat at a time. I'd never seen him look small before, but now? He wasn't just small. He looked cornered. He lifted one of the pages, his fingers trembling so badly the paper quivered. "Where did you get all of this?" he asked again, voice thin, almost airy. "You already know," I said. "You broke into my files. You broke the law." He winced. It was tiny, but unmistakable. A crack running across the surface of his composure. I took a step back, giving him room. Not out of kindness, but because watching him unravel felt like witnessing a collapse in slow motion. His eyes jumped from line to line, each number hitting him like a blow. Repeated contractor invoices, matching signatures, timestamps that didn't align. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Oh, I understand perfectly." "No," he snapped suddenly, the panic twisting into anger. "You think you're clever. You think you've caught something, but you don't know the half of it." He reached for the folder again, instinctively trying to grab control, rip the pages, hide them, anything. But I was quicker. I pulled the folder out of reach, holding it tight against my chest. "Don't," I warned. He froze. His hand hovered in the air uselessly before slowly sinking back down onto the desk. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. I think I know exactly what I'm doing." For a moment, the old version of him flickered back to life. The manipulator, the smooth-talking executive who believed he could charm or intimidate his way through anything. He straightened in his chair and forced his expression into something he probably thought looked authoritative. "Emily," he said, lowering his voice to something almost gentle, "we should handle this professionally. You and I can sit down, figure out a way forward. I can help you. I always have." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just spilled out, sharp and humorless. "You've never helped me," I said. "You've cornered me, harassed me, pushed boundaries, and now you're panicking because your career is dangling by a thread you didn't expect me to pull." "And what do you expect to happen if people see these?" he snapped. "You think you'll be rewarded? You think anyone will believe you just happened to find these files? They'll believe the numbers." He swallowed hard. The panic returned, washing over him in waves. His knee bounced under the desk. His fingers twitched, tapping irregular patterns against the wood. "You're making a mistake," he murmured. "I can fix this. I can explain everything. There is no explanation that makes $300,000 go away." His eyes darted around the room like he was searching for a missing exit. There wasn't one. Not for him. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, lowering his head into his hands. "Jesus," he whispered, "you don't know what you've done." I felt no pity, not 1 ounce. He'd spent years making women in this department feel small, making me feel small. Now he was the one shrinking, folding inward, choking on the consequences of his own ego. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were glassy with fear. Real fear. "What do you want?" he asked again. "I already told you." "You want money," he said bitterly. "Of course, everyone wants money." "No," I corrected. "I want safety. I want distance from you. I want a transfer, compensation for what you've put me through, and peace of mind that you'll never put your hands or your words on me again." He slumped back into his chair, defeated. "You're blackmailing me." "I'm using leverage," I said coldly. "Blackmail is when you make up a lie. I'm holding proof." His gaze flicked from the folder to my face, like he was trying to read whether I truly understood the game I'd entered, and he realized, too late, that I did. He was trapped, and he knew it. He rubbed his forehead with shaking fingers. "If this gets out," he whispered, "I'll lose everything. You should have thought of that before you created a fake contractor." He shut his eyes. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Watching him panic should have made me feel powerful. Maybe it did. But beneath that power was something else. Relief. Relief that he wasn't invincible. Relief that the monster I'd feared for so long was just a man. A pathetic, desperate man. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed. Not acceptance, not yet, but understanding. The moment someone finally understands they aren't the predator anymore. "Emily," he said softly, almost pleading, "you can't go through with this. If people find out what you've seen, what you've done, they'll look at you differently too. I don't care how they look at me. I care about being free of you." His jaw twitched. I leaned forward. "You will agree to my terms. You will stop harassing me. You will approve the transfer. And you will pay compensation without asking questions." He stared at me, eyes hollow. "And if I don't?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Then this folder gets printed 10 times and lands on 10 desks by tomorrow morning." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Slowly, painfully slowly, he nodded. A tiny gesture of surrender. Because for the first time since I'd known him, Martin realized the truth. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was prey, and I was done running. For a moment after he nodded, the room felt hollow, like all the air had drained out and left us suspended in a vacuum. Martin sat slumped in his chair, pale, sweating lightly at the temples. I stood across from him, the folder still tight in my grip, my heartbeat steady in a way that surprised me. I thought I'd be shaking. I thought the adrenaline would swallow me whole, but instead I felt strangely grounded, like the floor beneath me finally decided to stop shifting. "Good," I said quietly. "Then let's make this simple." His eyes flicked up at me, small and unsure, like he expected me to change the terms now that he'd cracked. I didn't. I wasn't here to torment him. I wasn't interested in cruelty. I wanted freedom, not destruction. But he didn't know that. Not yet. I pulled a sheet of paper from my bag and placed it on his desk. A simple list. 3 lines. 3 rules. His gaze drifted over them. No more harassment, verbal, physical, or implied. Approve my transfer to another department by end of week. Pay compensation for damages, discreetly, directly, and without delay. When he finished reading, he stared at me like the words had burned through the page and branded themselves on his skin. "You're serious," he said. "I'm very serious. This is insane, Emily." "No," I replied. "What you did was insane. What I'm doing is justice." He flinched at the word. I leaned forward, planting my hands on the desk so he couldn't look away. "I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not asking. I'm informing you. These are the new rules." His jaw tightened. He wanted to argue. I saw the instinct flash across his face, the need to reassert control, to dominate the situation the way he always had. But then his eyes drifted back to the folder, and the fight drained out of him. "You don't know what this will cost me," he muttered. "Yes," I said. "I do. That's why you're going to do exactly what I say." He let out a slow, shaky breath, then sank deeper into his chair as if gravity had suddenly doubled. "Fine. I'll arrange the transfer. And the compensation. But you're not to—" I cut him off with a raised hand. "You're not negotiating." The shock on his face would have been amusing if the entire situation hadn't been so exhausting. "You think you can just dictate terms like this?" he snapped weakly. "I'm not dictating," I said. "I'm protecting myself. Something you should have done too, before you gambled with $300,000 and your own career." His eyes darted toward the office door, like he expected someone to burst in, but the floor was silent. We were alone in our little battlefield. I watched him slowly accept the new reality. It was almost surreal, seeing a man so accustomed to power shrink into someone who looked like he might crumble at a touch. But there was no victory dance inside me, just a sense of inevitability. Like this confrontation had been building from the moment he first commented on my blouse 2 years ago. When he finally spoke again, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "How much?" "For compensation," I clarified. He nodded. "Enough to cover the emotional damage, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the times you made me dread coming to work, the moments you made me feel unsafe." I held his gaze. "You know the number better than I do." He swallowed, guiltily, shamefully, painfully. Because he did know. He knew exactly what it would cost to make me disappear from his orbit without a scandal erupting in the center of the company. "Fine," he whispered. "I'll transfer the money by the end of the week." I nodded. "Good. When that's done, we're finished. I'll move to another department. You'll pretend I never existed, and we won't speak again. Ever." For the first time since I'd entered his office, something like relief flickered across his features. not comfort, just the faint glimmer of someone clinging to escape. "Emily," he said, voice wobbling, "just don't go to HR or the board or anyone." "I won't," I said, "as long as you keep your end of the deal." He gave a jerky nod. I picked up the folder, sliding the papers into my bag with unhurried movements. When I reached the door, I paused. Not for dramatic effect. Just because something inside me insisted I turn back and say this one last thing. "You know," I said softly, "you could have been a decent boss. A fair one. Instead, you chose to be someone women warn each other about in whispers. Someone people tolerate because they're scared. Someone who uses power as a weapon." He stared at me like the words were knives. "You built this version of yourself," I finished, "and now you get to live with it." I opened the door, but before I walked out, I glanced back one final time and saw a man who finally realized that the empire he believed he controlled was built on arrogance, not strength. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not victory, control. For the first time, the rules were mine, and he knew it. The hallway outside Martin's office felt brighter than it ever had. Not because the lights were any different, they still buzzed faintly, flickering in that tired way old bulbs do, but because I was different. My shoulders felt lighter. My breath came easier. I walked the length of the corridor like someone learning how to use her legs again. For the first time in months, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't forcing myself to swallow anger just to survive the day. When I stepped back into the main office, heads turned. Claire's eyes widened. A few people glanced at each other with raised brows, as if trying to decode what had shifted in the room. They didn't know what had happened behind that door, but they felt it. My posture, my expression, the absence of fear. "Em?" Claire whispered. "Are you okay?" I smiled. Small. Real. Better than okay. That confused her. She opened her mouth to ask more, but I shook my head gently. "Not here. Not now." Some truths belonged in quiet conversations, not in open-plan offices full of eavesdropping spreadsheets and gossip-thirsty photocopiers. I sat down at my desk, hands steady as I woke my monitor. Routine tasks appeared on screen, reports, reconciliations, pending emails, but they no longer felt like chains, more like stepping stones, temporary, soon to be behind me. Across the room, Martin's door remained closed. Good. Let him hide in his office and stare at the mess he'd made of his career. Let him sweat through the decision he already agreed to. Let him feel the edges of his power slip through fingers that once gripped everything too tightly. I had things to do. I opened my inbox. At the top sat an email from HR, unrelated, automated, mundane. But even reading it felt different now that I wasn't silently enduring someone else's control. My phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "You look different." What happened? My fingers hovered over the keyboard before replying. I just stopped letting someone walk over me. She didn't respond immediately. Maybe she understood. Maybe she didn't. But I didn't need validation. That was new for me. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of quiet productivity. I worked, but with a sense of detachment, like I was packing my life in mental boxes, preparing to move on. The transfer request would go through soon. He'd sign it unless he wanted the folder to become a corporate earthquake. And after that, I'd be somewhere new, somewhere clean. Around noon, I headed toward the break room. The walk felt lighter, too. Every step carried a hint of freedom humming beneath it. Inside, I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the warmth seep into my hands. 2 coworkers entered mid-conversation, but when they saw me, they paused. Not out of hostility, out of curiosity. Then, something unexpected happened. One of them, Jenna, cleared her throat. "Hey, did Martin bother you again this morning?" She said it so cautiously, like she wasn't sure if asking would make things worse. I blinked. "Why?" "Because you looked different," she said. "Like you finally told him off." I took a sip of my coffee before answering. "Maybe I did." Jenna's eyes widened a fraction. The other woman, Maria, let out a small breath. "Good," she murmured, quiet but fierce. Someone had to. There it was. Something no one had offered me before. Not a solution. Not a plan. Just acknowledgement. The kind people share in trenches, not boardrooms. I didn't say anything more. I didn't have to. They left a moment later, glancing back with subtle nods that said more than words ever could. When I returned to my desk, my inbox pinged. A message. From Martin. Subject, transfer request. My breath caught, not in fear, but anticipation. I opened it, approved. Just one word. No explanation, no conditions, no threats. The digital equivalent of a white flag. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the single pathetic surrender on the screen. My heart gave a soft thump. Relief, victory, exhaustion, all tangled together. This was step 1. The compensation would come next. But this was the moment I'd been dreaming of without knowing it. A way out. A clean exit. A beginning. For the rest of the day, I worked in silence. Not numb silence. Peaceful silence. The kind that replaced anxiety with possibility. When 5 o'clock arrived, I didn't rush out like usual. I took my time shutting down my computer, gathering my things, slipping my bag over my shoulder. People around me gave little glances. Curious ones. Claire approached. "You really are okay, aren't you?" "I think I'm getting there," I said. She hugged me briefly, supportive, careful. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." "I know," I said. I walked out of the office building and into the fading evening light. The sky was streaked with soft orange, the kind that promised change was coming, but not in a violent, destructive way. More like a gentle pull forward. I crossed the street and sat at the small cafe across from the building, a place I'd often walked past but never allowed myself to enjoy after work. It always felt too visible, too exposed. Tonight, I didn't care. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and watched the office tower rise into the dusk. Behind one of those glowing windows was the man who used to dictate the rhythm of my days. But not anymore. Today, I walked out without fear. And tomorrow? I'd walk into a future I chose, not one I tolerated. A glimpse of freedom was no longer enough. I wanted the whole thing. The morning after everything settled, I woke up before my alarm. An unusual, almost luxurious feeling. No dread clung to my chest. No suffocating anxiety twisted in my stomach. For the first time in far too long, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact before I even got out of bed. I got ready slowly, almost deliberately, choosing a blouse simply because I liked it. Not because it hid me, not because it protected me, not because I feared someone's gaze. My reflection in the mirror looked steady, older, maybe, sharper, but unmistakably mine. When I arrived at the office, the building felt different. Familiar walls, same buzzing lights, same weak coffee scent drifting from the break room, but something in me had shifted so deeply that everything around me seemed lighter, less threatening, less permanent. People greeted me with small nods, flashes of curiosity, subtle smiles. Not pity, not confusion. Respect, maybe. or simply the recognition that something in my demeanor had changed. Martin's door remained closed again. I didn't bother looking twice. I didn't need to. By noon, an email arrived in my personal inbox, an automated alert from my bank. A deposit has been made. My breath caught slightly even though I expected it. I clicked the notification. The amount stared back at me, undeniable, significant, enough to confirm that Martin wasn't stupid enough to test me. Compensation, quiet, immediate. A debt paid not out of generosity, but survival. I closed the message and leaned back, letting the final piece of the deal settle into place. It wasn't triumph I felt, and it wasn't guilt either. It was something more balanced, more steady, a sense of reclaimed ownership over my own life. After lunch, the transfer paperwork arrived from HR. Signed, approved, effective in 3 days. Claire noticed the smile I tried and failed to hide. "So it's official?" "It's official," I said. She hesitated. "I don't know what happened exactly, but I'm glad you're getting out. You didn't deserve any of the crap he put you through." I nodded, grateful for her sincerity. "None of us did." For a moment, Claire's expression softened, then tightened. "Do you think he'll stop? I mean, with other people?" I looked over at his office again, closed blinds, looming silence, the shadow of a man who'd been forced to confront his own fragility. "Yes," I said. "He'll stop. At least for a while." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "Good." By 5 o'clock, the office emptied. I gathered my things, letting my fingers trail over the desk I'd worked at for years that had felt heavier than they should have. I wasn't leaving today, but I could feel the transition already rising around me like a tide. On my way down the elevator, I didn't feel fear or hesitation, only release. Outside, the air was crisp with the kind of cold that wakes you up in a way coffee never could. I crossed the street and walked into the little cafe again, the same one where I had sat after confronting him. A quiet place, warm inside, with soft lamps and chatter that didn't demand anything from me. I ordered tea this time and took the same seat by the window, watching the office tower across the street glow in the early evening. Behind those high windows, Martin was probably pacing or hiding or plotting a way to stitch together the torn edges of his career. But none of that belonged to me anymore. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a storm. He wasn't a shadow over my life. He was just a man who got caught. And I was no longer the woman who let herself be stepped on. I opened my bag, pulled out the black folder, and set it on the table. The weight of it felt less ominous now, more like a reminder than a weapon. I flipped it open one last time. The copies sat neatly inside, the incriminating details sharp, undeniable. They had served their purpose. They had equalized the imbalance. They had given me back my voice, and now they could let go. I took out all but one copy, just one, the insurance policy I'd keep tucked away in a safe place. I folded the other pages, slid them back into the folder, and placed it on the empty chair beside me. Then, after a moment of stillness, I reached into my bag for a lighter. The small flame flickered softly, casting a warm glow. I held the edge of the first page near it. Paper curled, print darkened, heat surged. I dropped the burning sheet into the cafe's small metal ashtray. It disintegrated quickly, curling into ash and drifting like gray snowflakes. One by one, I burned the rest of the copies. No fear, no regret, no anger, just closure. When the last page turned to ash, I exhaled deeply, like a weight I'd carried for far too long finally slipped from my shoulders. I put out the flame, brushed the ashes into the tray, and closed the now empty folder. Outside, the office lights continued to glow, but they no longer felt like watchful eyes. Just windows, just a building, just a place I'd outgrown. I took a long sip of my tea, letting the warmth settle deep inside. My potential, as Martin once called it, had nothing to do with blouses or smiles or silence. My potential was knowing when to fight back, when to reclaim my story, when to walk away. I set my cup down and smiled at the reflection in the window, calm, steady, unafraid. For the first time in a very long time, power was in my hands, and I wasn't giving it up again.